Okay. Tēnā koutou katoa, kua taimai ki te whakarongo ki ēnei kupu ruarua aku. He ahorangi matai ororongo takomahi ko Gregor Byrne taku ingoa, nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. So thanks very much for that introduction, Jack. I am Gregor Byrne. I'm a professor of audiology at Te Whare Wānanga o Waitaha, the University of Canterbury. It's really nice to be here talking in a pub. I don't normally get people drinking during my lectures at uni. They might often need one afterwards, but typically not during the lecture itself. So I'm a professor in the field of audiology, or matai ororongo in te reo Māori. And the goal of, what is that? That deals with the ear and hearing, and more specifically the assessment, diagnosis, and non-medical management of hearing and balance conditions. Now, we're going to leave the balance side of our practice to one side. That's a totally different talk. And instead focus on the hearing and the communication side. So the goal of audiologists and our close cousins, the speech-language therapists, is to ensure that people have sufficient communication to thrive in their environments. It's difficult to overstate the importance of communication for well-being throughout the lifespan. Now, when I say communication, it doesn't necessarily mean spoken communication. So our members of the deaf community, New Zealand Sign Language is one of our official languages, and that is their preferred and their first language. And it's a complete, rich, and visually really expressive language used by tens of thousands of people throughout Aotearoa. But it's also a fact that the society we live in, a lot of the systems we have to interact with, and mainstream culture is really centered around hearing and spoken communication. And so as, my close colleagues and I at the University of Canterbury, we teach into programs that teach and train and produce speech-language therapists and audiologists. But a large part of what we do is research, and a large part of what I do is research aimed at improving the assessment of hearing and speech intelligibility, and also the accessibility and equity in terms of the provision of hearing healthcare, particularly in the Aotearoa New Zealand context. So by background, I'm an auditory physiologist. I'm also an audiologist. And so what I'd like to do tonight is to take you on a whirlwind tour of the auditory system. I want to tell you a bit about my research, but in order to do that, I've got to tell you how the ear works and how hearing happens. And fortunately, talking about the ear and hearing happens to be one of my favourite things to do in the whole world. It's hard to stop me. So the challenge tonight is keeping it to half an hour. I'd also like to point out that this is the 50th anniversary of Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, Māori Language Week. And so what I'm going to try and do is thread in a few of the kupu o ngā taringa, the words relating to the ears throughout the talk, just for your edification. All right. I want you to relax, take a deep breath. There's no test at the end, although calculators are permitted. All right, are we ready? Shall we begin? Let's begin. We're going to start at the outside and work our way up. So our taringa, our ear, consists of three parts. There's the outer ear, the middle ear, and the inner ear. And sound travels through the outer ear and the middle ear to get to the inner ear, and that's where it's converted from sound into electrical signals by the hair cells. They send those signals up to the brain, te roro, and those signals get up to the brain, and that is where you finally go, aha, I heard something. It lets you know that you heard something, and not just that you've heard something, but hopefully what you've heard, who you've heard, where it's come from, where the sound source is, if it's moving, lots of things around that. And if there's a message in it, what does that message mean? So lots of complicated stuff happens when we get up to the brain. I'm going to focus more on the peripheral side of things. So let's focus on the outer ear, te taringa waho. And if you look, I was going to say if you look at your ear, but it's a bit hard for you. If you look at your neighbour's ears, take a look at the person to the left of you, have a good look at their pinna. This is what this is called. So the outer ear consists of the pinna or the auricle, which is this part here. Also the ear canal, te awa taringa, which heads down and ends with the ear drum, te tōreno. And so The outer ear, this part here, if you have a close look at the one on your left, the person on your left, and then the person on your right, not too close up the back there, let's keep a respectable distance, you'll notice that there are lots of bumps and wiggles. And the bumps and wiggles of the person on your left are a little bit different, but basically quite similar to the ones on the person on your right. And the similarities, the commonalities are such that the anatomists have given names to every single one of those bumps and wiggles. The ridges and the grooves and the depressions between them, they all have their own names, like the helix and the ant helix and the Simba concha and the cavum concha and the triangular fossa and the scaphoid fossa. They've all got names. So I've got a deep and abiding admiration for the imagination of anatomists and the names that they give things. My favorite named feature on the outer ear is this part here, this flap of cartilage just in front of the ear canal. It's called the tragus. And that's derived from the Greek word tragos, meaning, do you like my Greek accent? Meaning the goatee part. That's the goatee or the hairy part of the ear. And as a middle-aged man, that's a problem I'm increasingly dealing with on a day-to-day basis. But your outer ear is super important. It doesn't just hold your glasses on. Without the outer ear, without the pinna and these bumps and wiggles, we wouldn't be able to tell acoustically up from down and front from back, which is incredible. So if we didn't have one of these, if we just had two holes on the side of our head, like a snake, we could tell left from right in the horizontal plane because sound travels at 340 meters a second, and sounds over here will hit this ear just a bit before they hit this ear, and a little bit louder in this ear than this ear because my head's in the way. But without them, sounds that there's a cause of confusion, we wouldn't know if they were coming from directly in front of us or directly behind us or up or down. And it's those bumps and wiggles which are the clue to that. So sound that is coming from a particular location in space, the direct path will go down your ear canal, but it will also interact with those sound waves bouncing off those ridges and cancelling out some frequencies and boosting others. And your brain over time learns to associate that particular pattern of filtering with the sound source location. So it's absolutely incredible. But yes, obviously its main job is to just catch sound and funnel it down the ear canal. So the sound travels down the ear canal to the eardrum. But why? Why do we have an eardrum? And what is sound anyway? So most of you will know that sound is fluctuations in air pressure, and they're really, really tiny. So sound travels in waves. Now, they're not the uppy, downy kind of waves that you get on the surface of water. They're transverse waves. This is more the backwards and forwards kind of wave. It's called a longitudinal wave. And so let's say the sound that I am producing now with my voice, here I am vibrating air molecules and it's sending energy, pressure fluctuations out in straight lines. So from my ear to your mouth, the sound is traveling in a straight line, perhaps off a reflection off the wall or the concrete floor. But it's passing in a wave directly to you. The air molecules themselves that I'm exciting aren't traveling across the room, you'll be happy to know. It's just the energy. So if we were somehow able to look at that energy, those waves as they travel forward, we would notice air molecules bunching up and pulling apart and bunching up and pulling apart into regions of higher pressure and lower pressure, higher pressure and lower pressure. But higher and lower than what? Like what is it more pressure than and less pressure than? The answer is atmospheric pressure. So we hear about atmospheric pressure in the weather report every day. We find out what the atmospheric pressure is today. But we don't actually appreciate just how massive that actually is. So we are, currently, you may not realize it, but we're currently standing underneath a column of air that's about 20 to 30 kilometers high, and the weight of all that air is pushing in on us from all directions, all angles, at about 10 tons per square meter. It's absolutely colossal. You can genuinely say, I'm under a lot of pressure at the moment. It's fine. But like when a strong front moves through, that atmospheric pressure can change 2 to 3% in a single day. So I said that sound is pressure waves on top of that atmospheric pressure, but it's so ridiculously infinitesimally small compared to the colossus that is atmospheric pressure. And just to give you some idea, at the quietest sound that we can hit, when I say we, the young people amongst us, the quietest sound that young people can hear represents 1/2 billionth of atmospheric pressure. 1/2 billionth. It's absolutely incredible. All right, so those sound waves pass down the ear canal and they vibrate the eardrum. And again, I just did this, right? You're picturing the eardrum going ba-boompa, ba-boompa, like a piston. You might have seen those animations. It's like an animation, like the eardrum going like this. It's not like that at all. It's atomic dimensions. So if you picture, again, at the threshold of human hearing, the quietest sound that we can hear moves the eardrum, are you ready for this, by a picometer. A picometer is a trillionth of a meter, or a billionth of a millimeter, or 1% of the diameter of a hydrogen atom. It's absolutely insane. It's like, thermal agitation kind of levels. It's ridiculous. And so it's not moving backwards and forwards. Oh, those animations show the eardrum going backwards and forwards like this, but that's just for one sound, like a pure tone at one frequency would be doing that. But my voice and the sounds that you hear don't contain one frequency, they contain thousands of frequencies. And so the eardrum is responding to all of those all at once. All of those frequencies, intensities, all of them are superimposed and very, very tiny still. And so the eardrum's vibration is actually the sum of all of those things. It's chaotic and it's atomic. It's ridiculously small. All right, so that's the quietest sound we can hear, 1/2 billionth of atmospheric pressure. What about the loudest sound that we can briefly tolerate? We call that the threshold of pain, right? So it turns out there's a millionfold range of pressure difference between the quietest sound we can hear and the loudest sound that we can tolerate, between the threshold of hearing and the threshold of pain. A millionfold range of pressures. Now that sounds impressive enough until you realize that the energy that is converted, conveyed in a wave varies with the square of the pressure. So if I double the pressure, that's 4 times the energy. If it's 10 times the pressure, that's 100 times the energy. So that millionfold range of pressures converts to a trillionfold range of energies that our ear can cope with, from the quietest sound that we can hear to the loudest sound that we can tolerate. A trillionfold. It's hard to even visualize what that is. I've had a go. Are you ready? So it is the equivalent of the weight of a 400-gram tin of lentils on the one hand, and the combined body weight of every human on Earth on the other. That is a trillionfold difference in weight. In terms of time, it's the difference between the 35 minutes of this talk and the 66 million years since the extinction of the dinosaurs. All the dinosaurs except the birds, obviously. It's insane. And so that is why we use a decibel scale when we are talking about sound pressures, because the human ear behaves and responds in that logarithmic kind of manner. That millionfold range of pressures that we deal with corresponds to just 120 decibels. So it's the same reason we use a logarithmic magnitude scale when we're talking about earthquakes. The differences in energy are so vast that if we use normal numbers, it would just be totally unmanageable. All right, so those sound pressure fluctuations that I mentioned, do they have to be in air in order to be sound? No, of course, they can be in water, it can pass through solids. As anyone who has shared a common wall with a noisy neighbour will know, the sound is going to get through that wall. But not all the sound. It'll be a little bit quieter and a little bit more muffled on the other side of that wall. And that's because sound has a lot of trouble getting from mediums, from a medium with one set of properties to a medium with a different set of properties. And that property in particular that we're referring to is called the acoustic impedance. So air has a certain impedance, liquid has a certain impedance, and solids as well. And so sound that hits a medium with a different impedance, a lot of that, 99.9% of that incoming energy will just typically be reflected. And only 0.1% of that energy will actually make it through there. And so those impedance mismatches are the cause of reflections in places like, and reverberations in badly designed cafes, for example. And it's also the reason why you can't have a conversation with someone who's under the water if you're on the edge of the pool, right? So they can't hear you and you can't hear them because 99.9% of the speech energy is reflected off that interface because of the impedance mismatch, the impedance mismatch. So that's actually a major problem that the ear has to overcome. So for land-dwelling mammals, among whose number I like to count myself, the sounds that we hear are in the air in our environment, and yet the receptors that have to detect them are fully and completely underwater in our inner ears. So without some mechanism to match the impedance of the air to the impedance of the water, 99.9% of the sound energy coming into our ears wouldn't even make it into our inner ear. It would just bounce straight off. So that is where the second part of our story, the middle ear, Te Taringa Waenga, comes in. And that's just on the other side of the eardrum, right? So we've vibrated the eardrum, then what? We're in the middle ear. So picture the middle ear as a room, perhaps double height, and it's air-filled, as all the best rooms are. And suspended across the middle of that room, we have the three smallest bones in the body. So they go from one side up into that attic space and then down to the other side. And that conveys the sound energy from the eardrum through to the inner ear where all the nerves are. Do you remember learning in school the names of those three tiny bones? Does anyone? That's the one thing most people remember about the ear. Anyone? Oh, that's fantastic. Good work. The hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. Excellent, that's great. So in Te Reo, it's the same. It's te hama, te kurutangi, which is more of a sort of a stone beater than an anvil, and te tarapu, which is a stirrup. So a hammer, like the malleus bone, we as audiologists, we like to be fancy. We like to use the Latin names for things. So we say the malleus, the incus, and the stapes, which is Latin for the hammer, the anvil, and the stirrup. It was named by Italian anatomists in the 1500s. So the malleus bone, the hammer bone, kind of looks like a hammer. You know, they can get away with that. The incus, I don't think it looks much like an anvil, but the stapes definitely looks like a stirrup bone. Top marks there, anatomists. It's a nice bony arch with a little foot plate that, you know, you can imagine using it as a stirrup, and that foot plate fits snugly into the oval window of the inner ear. So that's great. So the stapes, top marks. Do you know what the malleus actually looks like? The hammer bone, what the malleus actually looks like is the outline of the Christchurch suburb of St Martin's, where I happen to live. I am not joking. If you pull it up on Google Maps, you will see an anatomically correct malleus in all its glory with knobbly bits in all the right places. It's absolutely phenomenal. Now, I'm not saying that I moved to St Martin's because it looks exactly like a malleus, but I'm not saying that. All right, so the stapes, as well as looking exactly like a stirrup bone, is actually the smallest bone in the body. It weighs 2.4 milligrams. 2.4 milligrams. Again, that is a ridiculously tiny number. That's like 0.25% of a gram. So how best, I was thinking how best to convey just how small that is. What's a good analogy? Because, you know, I like a good comparison. And so perhaps this is a good moment to share with you what I think is perhaps the greatest comparison ever written. It's one that is lodged forever in my mind. It is the immortal words that appeared in page 3 of the issue of the New Zealand Herald on Wednesday, the 3rd of December, 2014. And the article begins like this. Are you ready? A strapping newborn baby boy is believed to have set a New Zealand record, weighing in at a whopping 6.85 kilograms, the equivalent of nearly 7 1-kilogram blocks of cheese. So I love that. I love that comparison, and I love it for two reasons. Firstly, At first glance, it seems ridiculous and totally unnecessary, but you've got to admit it is a more immediately tangible image than just the number on its own. And secondly, it contains within it the implicit assumption that New Zealanders understand quantities best when they're referenced to retail quantities of dairy products. All right, so the stapes, very tiny, smallest bone in the body, 2.4 milligrams. How small is that? I'll try and convey it in a way that us as New Zealanders might understand. So it's very nice to be talking to you here tonight in the fair city of Ōtautahi, Christchurch. The current population of Christchurch is about 417,000 people. We've overtaken Wellington. It's the second biggest city in New Zealand, 417,000 people. So if you took a 1 kilogram block of cheese and divided it evenly amongst the entire population of Christchurch, cut it up into 417,000 tiny, tiny, tiny pieces, each one of those pieces would weigh exactly 2.4 milligrams, the weight of the average human's stapes. Feel free to grab your calculator and check my maths. It is correct to a 100th of a milligram. That is correct. Okay, so yes, it's very, very tiny. Enough about the ossicles, as you said. Ossicles is the Latin name for the bones as a whole. They're tiny bones, they're called ossicles. Ossicles is Latin for tiny bones. Great imagination there. So the function of the middle ear is to act as a machine. It's made of bones, it acts as a machine, bone machine, fantastic Pixie song, by the way. But the goal of that machine is to transform the impedance of the air from the ear canal to the impedance of the water in the inner ear. And it does that in 3 ways, 2 of which are important. So the first is that it acts like a lever. So the bones of the joint of the hammer bone and the incus, so the malleus and the incus, the hammer bone and the anvil bone, act as like the fulcrum, but the fulcrum isn't in the middle of the seesaw. The handle of the hammer bone, the manubrium of the malleus, or as we like to say in St. Martin's, Albert Terrace, is 1.3 times the length of the corresponding part of the incus bone. So you get a 1.3 times lever advantage there. The second factor, which is also really important, is that the area of the eardrum is 17 times larger than the tiny oval window that the stapes foot plate fits into, 17 to 1. So those two transformations combine, they multiply, so 1.3 times 17 is 22.1. And when you square that, you get a 500 times reduction in the impedance mismatch. So that bouncing off goes away, ceases to exist. In fact, the impedance matching is so efficient that the eardrum moves as much as the air does that it's attached to. So it's almost like it's part of the column of air rather than the boundary between two different as an interface. It's absolutely phenomenal. All right, so because of that, the sound passes smoothly and efficiently into the inner ear. So we've dealt with Te Taringa Waho me Te Taringa Waenga, but as I mentioned, it's a jumble of different frequencies and intensities, all mushed together that hit the eardrum. That also makes its way into the fluids in the cochlea. So we've gone from sound in the air into sound in the water in the cochlea. Now we're in the inner ear, Te Taringa Roto, and what happens there is truly phenomenal. You thought the middle ear was impressive, the inner ear will blow you away. So I say the inner ear, I'm referring specifically to the anterior, the front part of the inner ear, which is called the cochlea or te koko. Cochlea comes from the same root as cockle shell. It's basically 34 millimeters, but it wraps around itself 2.5 times into a little kind of squished package about 1 centimeter across and 0.5 centimeter high. And within it are 3 fluid-filled tubes that wrap around a central core of nerve fibers. And those nerves become the auditory nerve, which heads up to the brain to let us know that we've heard stuff. So we've got these 3 fluid-filled tubes, if you like, and the membranes that separate those tubes are really, one of them's very, very boring, But the other one is phenomenal, and that is the basilar membrane. That's the one we're going to focus on tonight, the basilar membrane. It's like a long, thin trampoline that extends the length around that spiral, and sitting on the basilar membrane trampoline, is something called the organ of Corti, named after Alfonso Corti, the Italian anatomist. And it's the organ of Corti that contains the hair cells. The hair cells. I did my PhD on the regulation of the outer hair cells. I spent 5 years making mathematical models of all the fluids and the electrical properties and that sort of stuff. But I'm going to distill it down now into just a few sentences. All right, so they are absolutely remarkable. The hair cells detect the vibration that's happening on the basilar membrane. But what are we going to do if it's a big jumble of different frequencies? How on earth are we going to sort that out? How can we make any meaningful sense out of that? And the solution comes, like, when you yell into a piano and it yells back, it's kind of like, you've not done that? No? Okay, so next time you get a chance, take the lid off a piano, put your foot on the sustain pedal, and then in your deepest operatic baritone, if you yell, oh, and stop, you'll hear it yelling back at you, oh. And that's because the energy in our voice has set those piano strings vibrating, particularly the ones that are tuned to the resonant frequencies that we are producing. So it's just like that. We've set certain strings vibrating because the strings aren't all the same. We've got at the low end of the piano, we've got big, long, thick strings, which are quite easy to move. And at the high frequency end, they're a lot shorter and they're taut under a lot of tension and a lot lighter as well. So we've got this mechanical separation of different frequencies because of the piano strings. And the cochlea is kind of like that, but underwater. So the basilar membrane that I mentioned, it starts out at the end closest to the stapes bone. It starts out very narrow and tight and sort of quite stiff. And then as you go further and further around, it progressively gets wider and heavier and floppier. So you get this difference in the mass and the stiffness all the way around, so that jumble of different frequencies that we send into the sound, send into the fluids of the cochlea, actually get mechanically separated along the entire length of that basilar membrane. So now we've got high frequencies vibrating one end, mid frequencies in the middle, and the low frequencies are vibrating all the way up the other end. And we've got strategically placed hair cells and nerves all the way around there to capture those individual sound components. So suddenly we've got order out of chaos. We're still underwater though. Just for those piano fans out there, standard piano is like 88 keys. In order to match the frequency range of human hearing, we'd have to add another 5 keys at the bottom end to get down to those low bass notes, but another 27 keys at the top end. So our piano would now be like 120 keys long if we wanted to match the frequencies that humans can hear. All right, so the hair cells that I mentioned that are all the way along the basilar membrane, how do they do what they do? The answer is that they have, why are they called hair cells for a start? Firstly, because they have these tiny, stiff little hair-like projections out of their top surface that are called stereocilia. Now, stereocilia is Latin for stiff hair-like projections. And they form little hair bundles that can be moved backwards and forwards in response to sound. And at the tips of those hair bundles are tiny, what are they called? They're called mechanoelectrical transduction channels, which are tiny ion channels, like little trapdoors. And when you stretch them, you pull open the trapdoor and potassium can flow into the cell. So the inside of the cells are very negative. Potassium's a positive ion. It's got a very positive charge above it. So it really wants to go into the hair cell when you give it a chance. So when you move the hair bundle backwards, forwards, you're opening, closing that hair bundle. More potassium, less potassium, more potassium. The inside voltage in those hair cells is going up, down, up, down, up, down with every single cycle of the sound. So for a 500 hertz sound, that's 500 times a second, but that's all the way up to 20,000 times a second for our ultra high frequencies. We've got these voltage changes that are happening there. I didn't mention that there are 2 types of hair cells. So one of them is the inner hair cells. So they are, there's 3,500 of them, and they stretch around the length of the basilar membrane. 3,500 of them in a single straight line. And for each one inner hair cell, we've got 3 outer hair cells, which are sort of sitting next to it. So there's, I guess, 3,500 rows of those, and they're kind of packed like oranges. And the length of the outer hair cells is about 50 microns. So if you took a row of the average-sized hair cell at 50 microns and you laid 3,500 of them end to end, you would get the 17.5 centimetre long axis of a 1 kilogram block of mainland tasty. You would fit all of those hair cells exactly in that length there. So the inner hair cells, their job is to send signals up to the brain to say, hey, there's some vibration happening here. And they have, each one of them has about 20 nerve fibers attached to it. So they're really, really strongly trying to capture that information from the hair cell. And what the inner hair cells do is whenever the inside voltage goes positive, they release neurotransmitter, little signaling chemicals to say to the nerves, hey, fire now. So they're going 500 times a second. If it's much faster, if we get up to 20, 15 kilohertz or whatever, they can't keep up with the so they just go when it's going, and then they turn off when it stops. And the brain uses that information. So for low frequencies, it's looking at the timing of that neural firing. It can't be bothered, it can't keep up with the timing for high frequencies, so it pays more attention to exactly where on the basilar membrane that stimulation occurred. So as a result of those two things, we can tell the frequencies of the sound that we're hearing. But that doesn't improve the fact that the whole basilar membrane is still underwater. And I don't know if you've tried jogging in a pool when you're up to your waist. That's hard work, right? You've got the viscosity, the friction of the water to deal with. And that's where the outer hair cells come in. So there are 3 times as many outer hair cells, as there are inner hair cells. And their job is totally different. They have a very, very sparse innervation. In fact, the nerves that come to them are mainly conveying the pain response for when sound is painfully loud. That's where that signal comes from, we think. But the main job that outer hair cells do is that they are electromotile, which means that they can change their length with changes in voltage. So they get the same voltage signal that the inner hair cells do, up, down, up, down, up, down, every cycle, but they use it to change their length. And so when the voltage goes positive, they contract a bit. And when the voltage goes negative, they expand. And they're doing that however many thousand times a second. Who here has had a trampoline growing up, or has played on a trampoline, or a friend's trampoline, or have seen a photo of a trampoline? You know what a trampoline is, right? Okay, so if you've ever been on a trampoline with another person, you'll be familiar with the idea of the double bounce. So that's where, if you time your bounce just right, you can fire your brother up in the air. So that's what the outer hair cells are doing, except there's 3 of them bouncing your brother. So he doesn't stand a chance. And what that does is that actually provides what we call negative damping. It counteracts the friction, the viscosity of that fluid, cancels the friction. So that has the effect of increasing that sound-induced vibration of the basilar membrane by a factor of 100 to a factor of 1,000. The vibration gets up to 1,000 times bigger, and that adds 40 to 60 decibels to our hearing thresholds. And the coolest thing about it is it's not just an amplifier in the sense of, we're going to turn it up and now everything's louder. It only works for the quiet sounds. So loud sounds are loud enough, and we don't want to make them any louder. And fortunately, the outer hair cells can't contribute any additional energy to stuff that's already so massive. But what they can help with are the really tiny sounds, particularly at the high frequencies. So low levels and high frequencies, because that's where the viscosity problem is a bigger issue. So we get this non-linear amplification that actually improves our dynamic range, the distance in decibels between the quieter sound we can hear and the louder sound we can tolerate, and it adds a heap more down at the quiet end. And that's what's responsible for our exquisite hearing sensitivity. Not only that, but things that are in sort of viscous fluids, their tuning is very broad, right? So if I get a bell and it's underwater and I ring it, it's going to go bonk. Where it's in air, it's going to go dong and ring for ages. Cancelling the friction actually improves the tuning of the basilar membrane as well. So now the vibrations from sounds don't vibrate a broad area of the cochlea. It vibrates a really, really tiny patch of the cochlea and stimulates a very restricted number of hair cells. I like to use the analogy of it's the difference between playing a piano with your fingertips and playing it with your fists. Like which one sounds better? It's going to be the fingertips one. So just back to the piano analogy, our 120 key super mega piano, the frequency resolution of the cochlea is such that, okay, so let's take a piano. Two adjacent keys have a frequency difference of about 6%. And because of that sharpened tuning from the outer hair cells, humans can now tell the difference between frequencies that are only 0.1% apart. So what that means is that in some parts of the cochlear piano, you'd have to fit 57 extra keys between every single key. It's not uniform throughout the entire length of the cochlea, but it's adding up to thousands of keys long. It's increasingly a ridiculously large piano now. All right, so the outer hair cells, as amazing as they are super vulnerable, right? So old age, exposure to loud noise, ototoxic drugs like aminoglycoside antibiotics and cisplatin chemotherapy compounds, those sorts of things can cause them to drop off the perch. And the consequences are that we lose that hearing sensitivity. We might lose about 60 decibels of that. Particularly at the high frequencies, you might notice that a lot of people with hearing problems, the problem is in the high frequencies, because that's where you've lost the outer hair cells, and that's where the outer hair cells were doing most of their work. The other thing about it is that broadened tuning, because we've lost the sharp tuning, that reduces the clarity of speech signals. So my speech, for example, contains high frequencies, the consonants, those sorts of things, and then the intense low frequency vowels. And those bits get through, but you lose the clarity from the high frequencies, and that's where a lot of the information from speech is contained. All right, so that's an issue. All of that, just very quickly to complete the picture, all of that raw data, all of those nerves firing like mad, that all goes up through the brainstem, through various nuclei, little relay stations that process that information, extract key features, throw away the rest, and send the signal up to the cortex, which is where you, aha, I heard something. And if you were doing a hearing test, that would be the point where you would push the little button to say, I've heard that sound. So who here has done a hearing test like that? Excellent. If you're old enough to remember, it's probably the push button type of thing. So we put headphones on you and play you some sounds. So there's actually two ways that sound can get into your inner ear. And mostly the way you're hearing me right now is via what we call the air conduction route. And that's the route that I described where sound goes down the ear canal, vibrates the eardrum, the middle ear bones to the cochlea, which does the hearing. But there's another way to get sound to the cochlea. If you've got fingernails, if you just scratch your hair right now, if everyone scratches their hair, can you hear that? Can you hear that? Yep, so that sound has passed directly into the bones of your skull and gone straight to your cochlea. So try again, get your fingers out and drum across your head like this, and you can hear that very clearly. That sound hasn't gone through the air and down your ear canal, and we can prove that. So this is the Two Thumb Brewing Company. If you take your two thumbs, put one in each ear, and now tap on your head, if everyone could do that. Let me just quickly, excellent. You don't look ridiculous at all, it's fine. That is the other way that we can test that the sound can get to your ears, get to your cochlea. And we test that as audiologists. We test those two things separately. So we test the air conduction pathway with headphones or earphones. We test the bone conduction pathway using a little black vibrating box that we press against your skull with a flexible wire rod. And the results that we get through the air conduction, if they're different from the ones that we get from the bone conduction results, then the difference between them says, the sound has had trouble getting to the cochlea. We call that a conductive hearing loss. If there's a trouble getting down the ear canal through the middle ear, that's a conductive hearing loss. Now, the consequences of, whereas the one that is from the bone, that is from the outer hair cells not working as they should. So something in the cochlea is the source of that problem. We call that a sensory neural hearing loss. Sensory meaning hair cell and neural meaning the nerves. So the differences between those two types of hearing loss are quite profound. So if you, particularly for speech discrimination, so if it's a conductive hearing loss, we just make the sound louder and we're all good. So as long as we boost the right frequencies, you will have clarity of speech and you'll be fine. But the sensory neural hearing loss, it's hard. You'll get audibility back, but not necessarily that clarity because of the smearing of those responses. So the other thing that we do as part of a hearing test is the pure tone audiogram, where we say, what are the quieter sounds you can hear at these different frequencies? We use that information to predict how well you're going to understand speech in quiet, but it's not the whole story. So we actually test that explicitly. We do something called speech audiometry. We play you samples of speech and you repeat back what you heard. And that's one of my major research interests, is what is called speech in noise testing. So when someone goes to the audiologist, it's typically not, they don't come in saying, I have difficulty hearing tiny beeps in one ear at a time in a soundproof room. They typically come in saying, I have problems understanding speech in background noise, right? So that we can actually test that directly. We take speech and add just the right amount of background noise, and we can adjust the levels of those things to test you and see just how much trouble you're having. And so that's one of my major research interests, is creating speech in noise tests to test how well people do in difficult conditions. And the thing about speech tests is they really do depend not only on the language that you speak, but even things like the accent. So a test that's recorded in British English, if you deliver it to New Zealanders, you'll get different results than if you'd had that test produced in New Zealand English. And so one of the things that I've been doing is creating versions with my students of tests that are in New Zealand English, so that they are more valid and appropriate for Aotearoa. But we've also created a whole heap of these tests with PhD students, international PhD students, in the Malay language, in Taiwanese Mandarin, in Brazilian Portuguese right now. But I want to spend a few minutes now talking about the work that I'm most proud of at the moment. Oh, before I do that speech and noise testing, typically people can see the person that they're talking to. And so, but not everyone is as good at using the clues that they see as other people. So that's another thing that we've done. We is a sort of an innovation that we made with a particular type of speech and noise test, where we, instead of just recording the audio, we recorded video as well, and chopped up, you're able to chop up these fragments of video and assemble new sentences. The thing about sentence testing is that if I play you a sentence today, it's 6 months before I can play you that same sentence again, because part of your brain remembers it and you'll do a little bit better than you would otherwise. So by chopping up these sentence fragments, we can assemble new sentences and never run out, which is fantastic. But I want to finish, this is Te Wiki o Te Reo Māori, I want to finish with the work that I'm most proud of at the moment, that I've been doing with my colleague Jen, who's up the back, and my colleague Ali in Auckland. And this is the creation of speech test materials in Te Reo Māori. And we are in the middle of, you might have noticed, a resurgence in Te Reo Māori, and the use of, and it's never been in a better strength in the past, I don't know, 50, 60 years, who knows. So we've been involved in creating speech audiometry test materials in Te Reo Māori, because we've got all of these kids coming up through Kura Kaupapa and Kohanga Reo, whose first language is Te Reo Māori, and we aren't equipped. We don't have, as a profession, don't have the tools to test them with. And so that's not good enough. And so we've recognised that, and over the past 5 years, we've had a number of students come through looking at what is needed to improve the practice of audiology and to make it more welcoming for Māori, and for working for the strengths of communities. And we published 3 articles in the Journal of the Royal Society, covering all aspects of the work that we had done to date last year. But my perhaps proudest moment was at the NZAS, the New Zealand Audiological Society Symposium a couple of months ago. We had a recent cohort of 3 Māori audiology students, and we had a 1-hour symposium where they presented 3 brand new speech tests that they'd created in Te Reo Māori, that are able to be delivered with 2-year-olds through to sort of the Middle Ages right up to the elderly. And it's absolutely phenomenal. We've since produced a 4th. There's more on the horizon. It's following a kaupapa Māori approach. I'm not Māori, but I'm able to participate through what's called a he awa whiri, a braided rivers kind of model, where I'm providing sort of Western biomedical science, and that's combined with Mātauranga Māori, to achieve sort of a strengths-based approach that really works best for for everyone. So there's lots of mahi ahead, but the goal is to have a suite of, we can ensure equitable access to hearing healthcare in this country by having a suite of audiological tests that are valid and culturally responsive for Māori speakers across the lifespan from Tamariki to Kaumatua, now and into the future. So kia kaha te rea Māori, ake, ake, ake. Ngā mihi kia koutou. Thank you.